Welcome back to Hardball. Attorney General Eric Holder opened the door this weekend to modifying the Miranda rights given terror suspects. Let's listen.
If we are going to have a system that is capable of dealing in a public safety context with this new threat, I think we have to give serious consideration to at least modifying that public safety exception. And that's one of the things that I think we're going to be reaching out to Congress to do, to come up with a proposal that is both constitutional, but that is also relevant to our time and the threat that we now face.
Our time. Does this signal that the Obama administration is giving in to the right wing? Joining me right now is John Timoney, who is police commissioner, Miami police commissioner in Philadelphia. His new book is Beat Cop to Top Cop, and I am going to read every word of it. There it is. Also joining us is Anthony Romero, pal mine. He's executive director of the ACLU. Gentlemen, I was stunned to hear the openness, Commissioner, first, with which the Attorney General admitted, basically, that we're modifying what we all grew up with. Whatever you say can be used against you. The police officer, the arresting officer has to say that. He's always said it. He's forced to say it since Miranda. Did you hear in that, Chief Timoney, that we're not really going to have that in cases of terrorism?
I did, but you know, back up for a second, Chris. There always has been a public safety exception where lives are in danger. God forbid there's a child that's buried alive, and you need to find that in times of the essence. In the new age of terrorism, the notion that we lock up a guy who may have information of a backup cell coming in that could cause great harm and great damage, I think the public exception policy or rule of Miranda applies. And I think what the Attorney General is trying to do, I think, is correct. They're trying to look at it with good constitutional scholars and come up with a policy that doesn't throw out the Constitution.
Yeah, I guess that's the question, Anthony. I can imagine we see this case of a guy who obviously is a fugitive from, he's almost a hot pursuit case. What happens if there's a bunch of people who are Arabic speaking, or they have an accent, or they have a Middle Eastern aspect to them, and a cop walks in the door and sees 5 people arguing about America, and did somebody say something against America here? Do they become terror suspects? Do you drop Miranda with them? I mean, where do you draw the line on this safety exception? I guess is the question.
I think that's exactly right, Chris. And I was astonished that the Attorney General yesterday said that we need to broaden the public safety exception. I mean, break it down first. When we give up our freedoms for our safety, we lose. That's what the terrorists are fighting for. And most fundamentally, when you think about Miranda, that's the one right that most people know from TV, the right to remain silent, the right that you know that anything will be used against you in a court of law. God, that's the one right that people get. And when you begin to chip away at that one, you're chipping away at one of the bedrock rights. Number 2, right? No one can tell us why we need these additional powers. You have the public safety exception. It's worked in both the Christmas bomber and the Times Square bomber. We've got them talking. We're using their statements against them. What powers does the government have now that it doesn't yet need? Third, it's going to make prosecution so much more difficult. When you start opening up this Pandora's box, we're going to have so much litigation on our hands. Fourth, Congress doesn't have the power to chip away the Fifth Amendment. That's a basic right. That's in the Bill of Rights. And finally, I'll just note for Police Chief Timoney that ironically, when this issue last came up in the Supreme Court in 2000, it was law enforcement officials who weighed in saying that they wanted Miranda because it made for law enforcement to be effective and professionalized.
Correct. And I wrote an op-ed piece on that issue, supporting that Miranda shouldn't be watered down. However, in the area of terrorism, this is a whole new era. And I think that's what Eric Holder was trying to deal with yesterday, that we've got to take a look at it and make sure, for example, that it's done properly, that there are protocols in place, that there are written policies in place when it does apply, when it doesn't apply, so that it isn't left up to the individual agent or police officer.
Yeah, we have those policies in place.
Well, let me go to the Chief on that, because I want to ask him, in real practice, when you're out in the field and you get a suspect, I've noticed in the case of the Christmas bomber, and we're using these funny terms, Christmas bomber, Times Square, a little bit whimsical perhaps, but we use them. They both, we were told, were Mirandized at a point. Now you wonder what principle applies if the guy's about to interrogate it very aggressively. Why do you Mirandize the guy, Chief, after you've already interrogated him? What's the point at that point? I don't get it. Why warn him of his rights after you've got all the info out of him?
Well, I think the issue of the Christmas Day bomber, attempted bomber, he was not a citizen. So this was an enemy combatant that came in from across the pond, if you will. So I don't think he had any rights anyway.
Well, that's
different story here. It's a naturalized citizen. It's a naturalized citizen, and there clearly the rights of every American applies.
Okay, let's go to that more difficult case. Let's go to a case of an enemy. Somebody clearly is an enemy national who's out for no good. How do we treat him? Anthony.
Look, the Bill of Rights is very clear. It's every person is entitled to core Fifth Amendment and Fourth Amendment rights. Just because you're not here as a citizen doesn't mean you don't have rights. This is America. Second of all...
Well, the guy's in an airplane over America, first of all. There's a question of geography. Is he here if he's committing a crime in the airplane above us?
No, it's different. But both the Times Square and the Christmas Day bombers were in American soil. And I think it's a red herring when we talk about the fact that we're going to try to carve out an entirely new system when our system has worked. We have prosecuted 300 terrorism cases in the criminal courts. Our law enforcement officials know what to do. We should give the FBI a big pat on the back for how they handled these last 2 cases. It's working. Now, you have to tell me what is not working that requires us to revisit something as fundamentally important as Miranda.
Okay, we're going to be talking about Miranda a lot. I want to get to the chief on this because I love the way you've had real experience. You're a real policeman from the bottom to the top. Let me ask you about this. Profiling.
Yes.
I've always talked about driving while black. I've grown up with those, not grown up, but we've heard a lot from the minority people about this, that they feel that just being African American, for example, on the Jersey Turnpike, you're stopped. I've had people, friends of mine tell me it happens, it happens, it happens.
It does.
And how do you get around that? How do we stop police officers from doing, not giving away their common sense or their nose for crime? We want them to have that. But to respect people's privileges and rights as citizens if they're not doing anything wrong.
Well, I mean, a few things. One, the policy from the top must be quite clear. It must be written and articulated that racial profiling of any sort wouldn't be tolerated. That's number one. Number two, part of training. The difficulty, and I put a program into place in Philadelphia here in 2000 that it was pretty elaborate. I can't go into it now, to try and identify police officers. And even where you think you identified a police officer who may or may be engaged in it, the difficulty of proving it and then what to do is extremely, extremely hard.
Yeah, we've talked about it. It's a challenge, and I think we got to meet it. And we got to protect the rights of people. We got to protect people as well. It's always going to be a challenge, right, Anthony?
It's always
going to be a challenge. If it were easy, we wouldn't have you, and we wouldn't have the ACLU.
And especially if we pass laws like in Arizona that is legislating racial profiling, it's always going to be a challenge.
Anthony, I know where you stand, buddy. I'm glad you're there.
You'll see us in court this week.
Thank you. Chief Timony, congratulations on this book. It reads like you, sir. You obviously had a big hand in writing every word of this. Thank you very much, Chief.
Thanks, Chris. Good seeing you.
Up next, the right-wing's hypocrisy problem on gays. This is one of the novel discussions we're going to have around here. Why are some prominent anti-gay conservatives been caught, well, being caught and doing what they preach against? But in 1 minute during the break, why can't Mitch McConnell pick a winner? This is Hardball only on MSNBC.